Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Rooted in Love. And today we have the opportunity to really go deeper on St. Joseph, our sponsor. Um, we're celebrating St. Joseph Day. And we have Sister Jayne Helmlinger joining us today, as well as Jason. So welcome, both of you. And just a little bit about Sister Jayne, and I'll have you share a bit more about where you are today, Sister Jayne. So I met Sister Jayne in 2007. That's a long time ago, right? And at the time, Sister Jayne was serving as the executive vice president for mission integration for, at the time, St. Joseph Health. And she hired me, and it was a great experience. And she chaired the St. Joseph Fund board at the time. And then she left St. Joseph Health because she was serving then as the general superior for the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. So, where are you now, Sister Jayne? What are we doing?
So I transitioned from elected leadership into working within our Center for Spiritual Development in Orange.
Okay.
And I'm a certified spiritual director. I give presentations on spirituality, on our charism, on mission. And I also am a part of a team within our congregation on diversity, inclusivity, and equity, and working for justice for all. I'm also a member of I have a team that I work with in initial formation. I'm the director of initial formation, and that's for women have not made final vows yet in our community. So work with the team and the mentors for each of those women to help them understand what it means to be a sister of St. Joseph and to grow into their vocation, which I really enjoy that aspect of my work.
I love that. And I believe you're still involved with Providence St. Joseph Health, right, sister?
Yes, I'm on one of the boards up in Sonoma County, and I'm also a member of the St. Joseph Fund.
Yes, yes. It's so great to have you back. And
Thank you.
it's really interesting for you to reflect on your journey, our journey together with the St. Joseph Fund. Um, and really thinking, with St. Joseph's Day. And when you hear the phrase that really is based on Father Madai's principles, maxims, rooted in love.
Mhm.
What does that mean to you? What does that say to you today?
Rooted in love for me is where does uh, your energy flow from how are you expressing the love that God has given each of us? Where are you putting those energies? So for me, it's back to the fountainhead. And for us as Sisters of St. Joseph, we're Trinitarian by our spirituality. So it's interwoven into the deep relationships we have with the Trinity, as well
Mhm.
then that overflows into the people that we interact with every day. So how am I demonstrating the love I've received for God with the people that I work with every day and minister with? And way back when I was a novice, 40 years ago this July, I always pictured that as a reed in a pond, and it's
Mm,
oxygen and the air and the breath of God that comes through me that I can give out.
mm,
And Father Madai had always said, I love love and I let love love through me. And that means I love God. I let God love through me. And that's really what I try to be as a sister of St. Joseph. And I think it's also what our fund tries to be.
yeah.
How do we share the love that we've experienced and our resources, our stewardship of everything about ourselves with the wider community? Because it's never just about us. We're communal by nature. We're social
Mm,
by nature. That's how God created us to be. So that's one of the things I love about this fund. It's all about community and the
yeah,
relationships.
yeah. Thank you for that. And
Mhm.
I'm wondering, Jason, I remember us in that room, in the Jack Glazier conference room, and we were there for a day and a half, and really thinking about reflecting on the work of the fund and what was that to me, what was that fundamental um, philosophy commitment that we had. Share a little bit, Jason, about rooted in love and what that means to you as well at the fund, and also what you are hearing from our grantees in the field.
Yeah, I mean, when we were there, we were talking about, thinking about it's been like maybe 5, 6 years since we were in that room and really thinking about that the St. Joseph Fund was at at a crossroads. Where do we want to be? There was a lot of demands coming from our community, more needs rather than demands, but
Mhm.
also where the field of grant making and philanthropy was going.
Mhm.
And I think for us, it was very existential. Like, what does the fund stand for? What does St. Joseph Fund stand for? What are we about? And just being in that room, reading the walls in that room, there's a lot of artwork with quotes
Mhm.
from Jack Glazer, from other influences. And what came out was everything we do is out of love, is rooted in love. And
Mhm.
it's the love that uh, God has for his creation. The love that when you look at the Bible, it's the love that's the greatest commandment.
Yeah.
And so we thought about it, and no matter what we did, it should be guided, rooted in love.
Yeah.
And it became really simple. It's like, okay, that's it. Everything we do, and everything up to that point, I believe we have been guided by love and rooted in love. And everything from that point on, we've been engaged in that in our
Mhm.
work. And so when we approach a a partner, a community partner, we come from a place of love. We're not there
Mhm.
to critically analyze
Mhm.
their strategies or their assets or their performance. We're there to walk side by side. And out of love, how do we work together? How do we work towards making a better community, having greater impact in our community, building capacity, healing? And it's a conversation, I think, in the world of philanthropy, which is ironic because the Greek words that make up philanthropy is
Mhm.
love of humankind.
Right.
And uh, I will say, in some sectors of philanthropy, it's not quite like that. It's very
Mhm.
much what is your return on investment? What are we
Mhm.
doing? They're very much of a business sense kind of way. And when you go too far in that direction, you lose a little bit of this sense of love. It's like, what are we
Yeah.
doing? This is not a financial transaction.
Yeah.
And so I think for us, having the idea that we are rooted in love is much more um, closer to our role as a ministry. We're
Mhm.
not just a foundation, we're a ministry that's guided
Mhm.
by the Sisters of St. Joseph.
Yes.
Um, but also, I think it's also a beacon for others in the
Mhm.
nonprofit world, but
Mhm.
also the grant making world, that you can have this rooted in love, that if it's trusting in community, that you're loving community, the ROI and everything else, that's going to
Yeah.
come, that will come. But we need to put the love first and foremost.
Yeah. Yeah. And it reminds me when we had our annual review, Sister Jane, and we were always discussing not what we did, but how we did it.
Mhm.
And that was just as important. I remember it was
Mhm.
a 50-50, and that's always something that we wanted to bring in our work in the community. It wasn't legally we need to do it this way, but it was how we did it, how we walked with our community. And before we go into the fund, we are talking about St. Joseph Day. We are talking about our patron saint. And if you can share a bit, Sister Jane, in reflecting on St. Joseph, how he's impacted you as a sister and the religious community as well.
Well, when I think of Saint Joseph, we always first and foremost, what always comes to my mind is the hidden Joseph. He's not really talked about in Scripture. Very few references to
Mm,
who Joseph was, and yet he was the father of Jesus. He brought him up in his Jewish faith. He taught him as a child with Mary as a unit. It was Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, and the larger community. Because in Jewish tradition, you're not just separate by yourself. You're part of a
mm,
larger community. And so when I think of the fun too, I think of um, that's what we do. It's not about us. For Jesus, for Joseph, sorry, he had a mission, and the mission was to raise his son with Mary in his tradition, Jewish faith, and to be the best person he could be. And when I think of that and the protection of Mary, I think of him as steadfast, righteous, meaning, he had his sole focus on that mission. And when I think about the fund and the people who help lead, both of you and the rest of the staff and the board members and Providence St. Joseph in general, it's really that steadfast vision and focus on what's our mission, what we're about. And that's what
Mhm.
Joseph did. It wasn't about him.
Yeah.
It was about the service that he was doing for his family. And I love that about Joseph. I think of him as courageous. I mean, he took Mary when in that time his culture said no, don't, let her
Hmm.
go. Um,
Uh-huh.
there's so much of Joseph there that for me, that's to admire. And what I like about it is get your ego out of the way. It's
Hmm.
not about any one of us. It's
Yeah.
about the mission. It's about what God has put us on this planet for. What
Hmm.
a way to fulfill, because each one of us matters, and that goes back to the dignity, the inherent dignity in every person. And so for me, Joseph symbolizes that because the
Hmm.
light's never really on Joseph. It's
Hmm.
always out. It always is pointing towards God. And that's what I think what our fund is to do is, yes, we have the funds and they go out and it points towards those people doing beautiful work in the community for the betterment of humanity and the earth itself. So when I think of Joseph, that's what I see. It's you almost don't see him. And so for us, they almost don't see us because the light shines on the work, the gospel work that we're doing through the fund and through the
Yeah.
people who we partner with. So Joseph for me is that beautiful, steadfast, hidden Joseph who's faithful, who's courageous, steadfast in his love of God and love of his family.
I love that. Thank you, sister. And Jason, where do you see the spirit of St. Joseph alive in the work that we're doing now in partnership with our community partners?
Yeah. No, it really is that. I think,
Hmm.
you talk about our work as a foundation, and if I'm being honest, we don't really
Hmm.
talk about the fund. We don't, and I think I, in the world of grant making philanthropy, again, if I'm being honest, like a lot of funders will elevate and put out a lot of like marketing materials about their work. I think we should do that, but that's something that we haven't really focused on. And so
Hmm.
even to this day, like um we're not as well known as some of the other funders in our regions. But we are well known to our community partners.
Hmm.
And the focus on relationship, on authentic relationship, on developing partnerships, on co-designing efforts in community.
Mhm.
That is, I think, drawn directly from those values and that tradition.
Yeah.
Um, I think we try to stay humble as a foundation. It's never about the foundation, but it's really about our partners. It's elevating the
Hmm.
work of our partners, highlighting, shining a light. Their voice was always there. Our role is maybe just to help highlight that voice.
Hmm.
And that's something that over the time that I've been involved with the St. Joseph Fund, I'm very proud of. And
Yeah.
um, I always look to, well, what have we accomplished and what have we built? But we never build something alone. We always build it together in
Hmm.
community.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And so I see that, and I see that spirit. I see those values, and that's what continues to keep us going.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think about how we're very intentional in how we engage in community and we bring forward that legacy of St. Joseph and of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. We we we've been formed as leaders within this organization to really recognize that we're not the experts. We're there to partner, and that we need to be flexible and evolve with the times. And that's something that's very fundamental to the Sisters of St. Joseph, right, Sister Jayne?
Mhm. Yes, I think
Yeah.
I like what both of you said because it is all about the relationships. And our charism as Sisters of St. Joseph is unity and reconciliation, and that it's bringing people together to God, to themselves, and to the love of God and dear neighbor without distinction. And I
Hmm.
think the fund really highlights the dear neighbor without distinction. We're
Hmm.
here for everyone, not
Hmm.
just specific people or
Hmm.
specific causes. It's really
Hmm.
what's the need. Identity, because we always talk about from 1650, since we were founded in the Puy France, it was
Right.
identify the need, seek like-minded and like-hearted people to meet those needs, and then do it. And allow the
Hmm.
Holy Spirit to flourish. Don't hold on to it, let it go. And I think the fund does that. I think we help empower others to do the work that they're so desiring to do because they're part of the communities that they're helping.
Hmm.
And we're a part of that. It's like this whole web of network across, there's so many different areas where the fund has touched lives through others. So we can do so much more than we could have imagined by ourselves by holding on to it, just as way back then as St. Joseph Health, now as Providence St. Joseph Health. It's all about those relationships built on trust,
Hmm.
that I think are just key to our ongoing ability to flourish
Yeah.
as a fund.
Yeah,
Yes.
that reminds me that there's in philanthropy, there's an unspoken power dynamic. There's always the
Mm.
funder here and the nonprofit community partner here. And I believe for us, we acknowledge that and we see it and we want to level it a bit, that we want to come in as a partner. In most cases, we don't know better. In almost every case, we don't know better than community.
Hmm.
And so calling out that power dynamic, but also equalizing it and saying,
Hmm.
hey, we're coming together. We are coming in. We want to be a partner. We're a partner that happens to have some resources
Hmm.
at our disposal, but the key experts are those coming from community.
Hmm.
And so I think about that often. I think about how, again, us being a ministry guides our work. And just yesterday, I was talking with some colleagues and thinking about, well, in traditional grant making philanthropy, you try to minimize risk. And you're like, okay, who are the ones that are doing all the work? Who have been and it's usually these larger nonprofit organizations. And granted, they do a lot of good work. But for us, we try to also look at groups and communities and organizations that maybe have never been at the table and they are representing communities and families who've never really been touched or been served in that same way. And so our focus is trying to go there and
Hmm.
partner and build with those folks. And so it's we're not being reckless and we're also I'm not saying like let's give us the hardest and
Right.
the most risky. But maybe
Yeah.
maybe I am saying that with our role here and we're doing it in a way that we can still build in those communities. So
Yeah. I mean, what it reminds me of, Jason, was the many conversations we've had with our board about taking on what we called at the time informed risk. We
Mhm.
did our analysis, right? We brought forward data, but that was a very pivotal point with our board saying we're going to be doing things a little differently because the community is telling us this is how we can serve. And our board members were very supportive, but we were very responsible in tracking and demonstrating and learning from those experiences. And I can say, Jason, that most of the success that we've had were with those organizations that were probably considered the least experienced, right?
Mhm.
The smallest budget, the most not as sophisticated, but the impact that they've had in the community because they knew what needed to happen and they
Mhm.
trusted us. So it's not just us trusting them, they trust us. And I always reflect on who's on the team.
Mhm.
I've been with the organization for 27 years now. And we all went to school, thank God. Our parents immigrated to this country with a very clear vision. And we have that lived experience, both in our communities and in our nonprofit sector. And that brings some credibility in the community as well. So always recognizing that our community is also deciding if they want to partner with us. And,
Yes.
and it is an honor and um, an opportunity to do it together.
Yeah.
And so that's how the fund has been evolving through the years.
I think, in the conversation, what you and Jason just shared, as a board member just back, as I had a big long gap where I wasn't associated with the St. Joseph Fund. And last summer we were able to go for a day and a half on our board retreat
Right.
to Montana, where I think it was 8 or 9 tribes that we were
Yes.
working with, that actually Jason and you worked with.
Yes.
And then what I loved about that, it was such a moving experience for me as a board member. One, it gives us a touchstone. We're not just reading about, okay, here's what's happened. We get wonderful reports, the financial reports, the here's what's, all the return on investment per se,
Yeah.
but to
Yeah.
have real people in front of us and to interact with them. And what I loved about it, it was the respect that we came into the Nine Pipes Lodge to meet with all these different tribes, to sit around this huge table. And I remember in my head thinking, oh, we would have done this so differently if it was our way of coming at it, including myself.
Mm-hmm.
I have a master's in business. It would have been, here's our agenda, here's the time we're going to have. It was
Mm-hmm.
conversation around the table one by one. First,
Mm-hmm.
who are you? It was the first identity of the person and getting, this is who you're speaking with. And so each of us had that chance, and then a little bit of the background. And what I loved about that is it showed me how much trust and relationship building had happened with you and Jason and the rest of your staff, and the trust, because it was very clear that there's not a lot of trust if you're this big organization from people who are on Native American. I don't even know how to put it into words. I just know what I experienced in being with those leaders of the different tribes and hearing what they do, and our relationship building by simply sitting around the table and listening to one another. And there was so much out of it that I still have graces from those days, that day and a half, and to hear their stories. And I think that was really important for us to do. We're the guests when we go there. This is their land, this is their
Mm-hmm.
tribes, and this is what they're doing, identifying those needs from the tribe in conjunction with Jason and you and the staff,
Mm-hmm.
and to see what's flourishing there and what they identified and how we're able to bridge a pretty severe gap. And when I think of that, it goes back to our charism of bringing people together. That's what I experienced. That was the St. Joseph Fund in action through you, through our board members, and the members of those tribes that gave us their trust. And
Mm-hmm.
let's face it, there's a lot of history that there's not trust. And so for that to happen, I thought, wow, this is the spirit of St. Joseph. This is what we're about, is bringing people together into God, and however that might look in each of our different religious traditions or just spiritual beings. So I took so much from that time together, and it was so short yet so very meaningful. And it was inspiring and energizing.
Yeah. I, I agree. And I remember those days there in Montana and reflecting, this was the first time we didn't have a board committee planning the retreat. This was the first time we did not have a formal agenda. And honestly, inside of me, I was a little stressed because I'm like, this is the norms. But I have Jason and Amy on the team saying, no, Gabby, this is the way it's going to be. Let's be, believe that this is the way we're going to do it. And it was, for me, what was very special about that time together was the different generations that were present at the table,
Yes.
and the power of the elders
Mhm.
really almost passing the baton to the younger generation, and
Mhm.
the younger generation saying, we're ready to take this to the next level, and we're partnering with St. Joseph Fund. I mean, that was amazing for me, just
Mhm.
thinking, Jason, for you, that time together, what memory do you have?
Yeah, well, I think when we were working on it, and I was working with Amy, our program officer, I said, "This is how it's going to go. We're not going to have this agenda." And
Right.
I knew for a lot of folks, it's like, again, we have some amazing board members, but they're coming from different professions,
Mm-hmm.
business sector, and other things, and everyone's time is very valuable. And from the outside looking in, it could be seen as risky or even a little almost irresponsible. It's like, what do you mean? Like, well, what's going to go? We kept saying, trust us, it's going to be fine. Trust us, it's going to be fine. And really, it is about if you trust community, you can never go wrong.
Hmm.
And this is what it is. We've built the relationship. These are not only grantees, these are partners. And in some cases, these are friends. We've shared stories of our own personal growth and milestones with each other.
Hmm.
And these are partners that we've spent months, if not years, working with. You know,
Mhm.
Yeah,
you trust in that. And
we
so
trust. Yeah.
and so coming out of that, on one end, it's seeing that and seeing maybe like, having hearing words from you, Sister Jayne, or the other board members about how it impacted them. That's what I think about because
Hmm.
the program team, Amy, myself, others, we get that almost every day because we're interacting with those folks. And it was more like, hey, we want to show, our board who put a lot of faith and trust into us to carry the
Hmm.
mission, to be stewards of these resources, to say that, hey, thank you for that. And look at all that what's been created
Yeah.
because of that, the relationships, but also the true community impact and that impact that results in, greater, if we get too measury and metricy, but greater health and greater wellness and
Hmm.
healing in our communities. That's it. That's what this is
That's
about.
it. Yeah. And the fund is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year as well. And again, I've been with the organization 27 years and really thinking about a pivotal moment of the existence of the fund and reflecting that being in Montana didn't just happen. It's taken iterations of how we've done the work. And
Mhm.
I'm going to ask, both of you, I'll share first about what was that moment or that you can recall that you started seeing something changing for the fund. And I can go way back to 2002. In 2002, I worked with Maya Dunn at the time, and we were under Sister Suzanne Sass's leadership, and we introduced the Community Building Initiative. And that
Mhm.
was the first time we began to move away from direct program funding. And at the time, there was a book that came out, Hillary Clinton, It Takes a Village. And
Mhm.
there were others talking about the power of community. And I remember clearly meeting with our board and talking about what does that mean for the fund. And Community Building Initiative was the beginning of allowing the community to identify the issue, allowing the community to define health. It wasn't just clinical, it wasn't diabetes management, it was the challenging communities, gang violence, street safety issues that impacted diabetes, for example. And I think for me, it was that moment of support from the board and courage that Maya and I had at the time to say we need to do it differently and how that's evolved. And that's one moment, a pivotal moment in my mind over the 40 years of the work that the fund that stands with me. And being in Montana really gave me that sense of here we are today because of all of the work that we've been doing through the years.
Yeah.
So opening it up to you, Sister Jayne or Jason, if there's a moment in time that you can think of.
When I think about that, what immediately came into mind was when we did move, even as a system, from strictly clinical understanding of health to the body, mind, spirit to health, wellness of the individual as well as the community. And that
Mm,
included safe drinking water, access to education, all of those things. But the actual funding piece of it, what came to mind was I don't remember what it was somewhere in Indonesia, and there was this horrible
mhm,
tsunami.
mhm,
And everyone at the ministry level, hospital level, clinic level would say, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? How are we going to respond as a system? And
mhm,
one of the things we did have budgeted in our fund was for those kind of natural disasters. Rather than,
mhm,
okay, we're just going to send this money and let it go. What happened was working with the local villages. When you said villages, that really
mhm,
popped into my mind because we worked with them and said, what do you need? Obviously, basic care was needed, and that's what, Red Cross and others were doing. We said, what can we do? And it was really to look at their economic base was obliterated because they're fishers, the fishermen and women, and their
mhm,
nets were gone, their boats, were gone. We're not talking these, wonderful boats. We're talking these little boats that they go out and cast their nets off the
Mm-hmm.
side. So it was really helping them to supply the money for them to get the fishing nets and the what all you need to go fishing and the boat
Yeah.
the boats themselves that were made out of wood that they made.
Yeah.
It was I just remember that was really impactful to me because it was empowering them
Mm.
to be able to, okay, we can rebuild. There's hope. Because when you're devastated, literally everything's gone. Your
Right.
home, your livelihood, people that you love, that died in the tsunami. It was a way to help them have hope and to say, you're not alone. You're
Mm-hmm.
you're way over here. We might never meet in person, and yet we do care. You're our dear neighbor without distinction, and it's not borders. That's
Mm-hmm.
what really impacted me. What our fund can have the tentacles of our fund can go across the world literally and to
Mm-hmm.
help people rebuild lives when disasters hit. And that was one piece of it for me that helped because back when I was in, administration, when I was the executive vice president for mission integration, I would get asked that a lot. Well, why are we sending it out there? We have all these needs. And it would always be the dear neighbor without distinction. It's not just us. And it was this is how. And when people heard it and they understood the impact and they helped contribute to that,
Right. Right.
all of our caregivers and
Mm-hmm.
staff, physicians, everyone, that's
Yeah.
us
Yeah.
helping and reaching out across the seas to help other people. And that to me was and is
Mm.
vitally important into our future, that we don't lose that part of our roots.
Mm-hmm. I remember that energy that we put into
Yeah.
that. Thank you, sister. Jason, what do you
Yeah,
think?
I don't know if there's any one particular moment. I think it's really an evolution. I joined the fund 14 years ago, and back then we did still have a lot of program and service support grants. We'd go in, but in that time, in the course of a decade, we've transitioned. Back then there was the, buzzwords in philanthropy and in healthcare, things like going upstream and social determinants. And honestly, people were like throwing out a bunch of different strategies. For us, again, it was this idea of how do we really center community? How do we partner um, in true partnership, an authentic partnership? And so you mentioned the community building initiative. That was one. And I think that was a very unique approach for a foundation to go in and not to focus on a, um, not putting the solution first,
Mm-hmm.
but really putting the relationship first. And
Mm-hmm.
it was a journey, looking at 3, 4 years working in one community, in one neighborhood, and walking with folks. And the first year was about building relationships. And then after that, it was then about, okay, well, how do we support this community the best we can so that they are in control of their own destinies? They are in
Mm-hmm.
control of selecting the issue, selecting the solution,
Mm-hmm.
and it being not a service-based solution, but one that is about their voice, advocacy, community power. And they would go in and work and get legislation passed, or get a policy passed at the local level. And that would change flow of resources or uh, uh, certainly change lives at that level.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was very informative for us as a foundation and made us look at all of our activities. Like, what are we doing? Because
Mm-hmm.
I think it was not about putting a band-aid on a situation. It wasn't just about, well, here's a grant for a service, knowing that at the end of the 12 months of that grant, that same organization would come back and say, oh, well, we need more money to,
Mm-hmm.
to address this need. We really took to heart, well, how do we work in partnership? And with those buzzwords of upstream, how do we work upstream? Well, there's nothing more upstream than trying to solve the issue at its root,
Mm-hmm.
not putting a band-aid. The solution is not more services, it's cutting off the need for that services in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And our definition then became much more about, well, how do we work in those spaces? Um, our work became much more about um, understanding that in many cases these communities were not represented or they were not involved in decision making for things that would affect them directly. And so our work focused on communities, on neighborhoods, on community organization collaboratives to work together to get into that sphere, to get into those places to make the decision. So really accentuating um, capacity building
Hmm.
towards community voice and community power.
Yeah.
And I see that as a direct line from our charge as a ministry
Hmm.
of the Sisters of St. Joseph, of the um, tradition that we have. And so
Hmm.
I think it's something that we continue to evolve. But again, going back to how we began this
Yeah.
conversation, still rooted in this community and rooted in love.
Hmm.
I think, Jason, as you were speaking and Gabby before, it was what came to my mind immediately was this picture, this image of the six sisters of St. Joseph who founded our congregation,
Hmm.
sitting around the candlelight making lace in the evening. And what they did, and they did other things then out in the community during the day. But part of that reason for learning how to do lace and make lace was to help women who had been widowed, had no one to help for them other than the only way they could survive was prostitution. So they were able, what part of our ministry at the very beginning, literally 1650, helping people learn a craft and how to make lace and then sell that lace and to be able to thrive. We didn't do it for them. It was giving them the support structure to help them thrive in a way that every human being can. And so when I
Hmm.
think about our fund and I think about St. Joseph's Day and what it stands for and how Joseph allowed Jesus to thrive along with Mary as a unit, that's what our fund does. It allows people to
Yeah.
thrive. They just need that foundation so they're not sinking. It doesn't feel hopeless. No, and they do the work. It's not them
Hmm.
doing it. It's just providing support one human to the other. And that's
Yes.
what I love about what this fund can do and the connections we're making literally all over the world. And I
Yeah.
think that's when I think about where we came from and as Sisters of St. Joseph, that was what it was about. How do we help people see their own dignity and understand it and embrace it? Because pressures from the external environment are telling them all the wrong messages. No, you're made in the image and likeness of God. How can I help you see that? And how can I help you thrive as a human being in your community?
Your
That's what I
community.
think our fund does.
That's great. And this has been great. Really reflecting on St. Joseph Day, the rooted in love, and just want to wish everyone a happy St. Joseph Day, and want to thank you for joining us in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy St. Joseph's Day,
Bye.
everyone. Thank you for the
Bye.
work you do
Thank
every
you.
day.
Thank you.